Hey, welcome to another Orbiter 2010 video. And in this video, I'm in the standard Delta glider. And I'm already in low Earth orbit. As you can see here, I've got a periapsis of 202 kilometers and an apoapsis of 202 kilometers. And I'm already in plane with the moon. This is an old scenario that I made. It's been over a year. I think this date is actually the date that I flew this flight. And it's now Sunday, October 14th, 2012. That's today. That's the day I'm recording the video. So what I wanted to do here, just kind of something that I've been curious about. I want to bring up transfer MFD. Actually, I think I'll bring it up on this side. And I'm going to bring up TransX on this side. And I'm going to set up a maneuver for going out to the moon. And I'm going to do it in both MFDs, just to compare. And this will also be useful, I think, for people who maybe know how to use transfer MFD to get to the moon, because you've watched the DG to the moon tutorial that comes with Orbiter. That's actually how I first learned to go to the moon, was by watching that tutorial. I watched it probably 20 or 30 times, maybe more. But using TransX, it can be quite a bit different than transfer. So in part, I think this video will also help people maybe learn how to use TransX for going to the moon by comparing what you would do in transfer MFD to its TransX equivalent. So I'm assuming that you know how to get up off the ground and get into orbit. If you don't know that, then this video might be too advanced. And I'm assuming that you know how to use a line plane to get into alignment with the moon. Again, if you don't know how to do that, then this video might be a little over your head at this point. But let's get started. It's actually been a while since I've even used transfer myself, so I've got to think about it. But in transfer, we select a target, and we're going to target the moon. And the direct equivalent of doing that in TransX is here we've got TransX on view setup, and that's what you need. If you're in view maneuver, you would need to press VW to get back over to view setup. And to target the moon, it's pretty simple. Here we have target set on planets, moons, which is what we want. But if for some reason that's set on ships, just press ADJ to toggle back and forth to get to planets, moons. Now to put in the moon as the target, there's no TGT button like you have here, but instead we press either ++ or -- until we have it on the moon. And you can go either way, -- or ++. And that's how you target the moon. So now we've got transfer MFD set up so that it's targeting the moon, and we have TransX set up so that it's targeting the moon. So these are now in an equivalent state. Now in transfer MFD, what you have to do to start configuring it is press HTO, and that's hypothetical target orbit or something like that. And the direct equivalent of that in TransX would be to press VW to come over here to view maneuver, and you would have to turn maneuver mode on. Turning maneuver mode on is basically the exact same thing as turning on HTO. So once again, these MFDs are in an equivalent state. Now, what we have to do in transfer MFD to find out how much delta V we need is we use dV plus. And we can just press it and hold it. And you'll see eventually that that ellipse there in the middle will grow and get out toward the moon. It takes a little while. And now it's growing. And we just need to get it out so that we're at least to the point where that ellipse crosses the moon. And I think it helps if you add in a little bit extra. Now the exact equivalent of that step in TransX is to press VAR to go through the variables. And we want prograde velocity. And the difference here is transfer only has one sensitivity setting. There's no way to adjust how much delta V you can add. In TransX, you can adjust the sensitivity from coarse to medium and so on. And if you keep pressing them, they go in a circle. So we'll start with coarse. And the way we add dV plus, so basically the equivalent of pressing this button is going to be to now press this button with this set to view maneuver and the prograde variable selected. You can see it adds in much faster than pressing dV plus. So this is probably the equivalent over here is probably fine. So maybe if you go down to fine, then you can see it adds delta V about as slowly as pressing dV plus does. But if we don't want to be that slow, we can go to medium. You can see it adds in much faster. But you do want to stop when you get to a certain point and change the adjustment down to maybe fine, and then just kind of dial it in like you did over here. So that's kind of the equivalent step in TransX for dV plus. Okay. Now the next thing that you do in transfer MFD is find your ejection point. Now this works slightly differently in TransX, and I'll explain how in a moment, but it's very similar. In transfer MFD, you press EJ plus to go forward to the point where this gray line kind of crosses over top of this line over here. And then that would be your ejection point. And the thing is, when in transfer MFD, when it's like this, it doesn't matter if you go forward or backwards, because we're not actually changing time, the time for the simulation time. All we're changing is at what point in the orbit we're going to do that maneuver. So if it would be closer, we could actually use EJ minus to come around this way. And get everything lined up over here. There you go. And again, that wouldn't matter if you went minus or plus. Now the direct equivalent of that step in TransX is to switch variables to man date. That's maneuver date. And by default it's on course. And this is way too sensitive. You do not want to adjust while you're set to course. So hit minus AJ a couple of times to come back here to hyper. And the hyper setting would be pretty equivalent to the EJ plus. The difference here between TransX and transfer is when you do this adjustment in TransX, you're adjusting the time, the simulation time, for when you're going to do this maneuver. And you can't go backwards in time. So you can't go like this. Because you can see now the simulation time for doing this maneuver has already expired. So you have to go plus. Because the difference here is that in TransX, we're not just picking the point in the orbit that we're going to do this maneuver, but we're also picking the exact time that we're going to do the maneuver. And it would be something about like that. Now, that's basically it, I guess. You could say now we're done. But there is something else that we can do with TransX that you cannot do in transfer MFD. And I'd like to show what that is. If we go forward in TransX and press VW a couple of times, we can actually view our encounter at the moon, and you can't do that in transfer, so there's no equivalent to do this in transfer. This is just one of the advantages of using TransX. What you're looking at here is the moon itself. This gray circle is the moon, and this green line represents our projected orbit out to the moon. And currently you can see that we're actually slamming right into the moon. Now you can see what an advantage that is over transfer, because here with transfer, we're just kind of flinging ourselves out to the moon and we don't know exactly where we're going to end up. So knowing now that we're going to slam into the moon, if we go backwards a stage and then press VW a few times to get back to maneuver, and by the way, whenever you go forward and backwards a stage, even though it already says we're on view maneuver, I find that you still want to press VW to get back to maneuver anyway. It's just a little buggy thing in TransX. Just trust me on this. If it says you're in view maneuver, press VW anyway to get back to view maneuver, because it's just more accurate. If you don't do that, then you may find that it says VW maneuver, but the variables are actually for a different view. But anyway, now that we saw that we were basically slamming into the moon, what we can do here is come back to our prograde variable, and you probably want to go all the way to hyper, and maybe just add in a little bit, maybe 3-4 clicks, and then go forward and see what it looks like. Hit VW to look at the encounter again, and it's not really any better. So now we can go back, and again it says we're at view maneuver. I don't trust it. I'm going to hit VW again, and notice when I hit VW again, it still says view maneuver. Now I am on view maneuver. So let's go to an alter setting, and let's take away a few clicks of prograde, and let's go forward again and look at our maneuver, or rather our encounter, and now you can see that we are not hitting the moon according to TransX. And let me give you one more benefit to TransX that makes this process even easier. Back here on the stage, VW maneuver, again I don't trust it, so I press VW again, and you can see it still says view maneuver, but now I am on the correct view maneuver. If I also bring up TransX on this side and go forward, I can actually view the encounter on this side, so I don't have to keep going back and forth between stages. And this makes it really nice because I can update TransX on this side and see it in real time over here. So let's change that to hyper, and now we can just pick our altitude for what we want. And I find that since TransX is a little inaccurate with its math models, it actually helps If you err with your minimum altitude a little on the high side, I think about 350 kilometers is usually good. So there I've got TransX set up to my liking. So let's look at transfer again. And here we are. And you can notice in the time I've been talking, this has shifted a little bit. So if I press EJ plus, it's a little better right there. And there's something else you can do with transfer that I don't know how many people know about this. But if you press, I think it's update. No, that's not it. It's step. No, that's not right. It's... that's it. Num. It's been a long time since I've used transfer. You can actually see this line coming out to the moon, and this square represents your... it's a numerical calculation for coming out to the target body. And to me, this looks like it would be a bit short. So I'm going to try to add a little bit of additional DV, maybe 2, 3, 4 clicks, then readjust the EJ, and now do this numerical calculation again. I guess you gotta hit it twice. And I guess you could think of this stage or this process as being somewhat equivalent to looking at view and counter, but this is more accurate. But that's basically what I'm trying to accomplish here. So that still shows me that it's coming up a little short. So 1, 2, 3 clicks. Maybe adjust that a little more. Now numeric to clear it. Numeric again to make it process that change. And that's pretty good. We could probably maybe add 1 more, 2 more clicks, and just try it one more time just to see. But that's pretty close right there. That's just an additional step. You really don't have to do it. I could have made it to the moon just fine. Like that. Okay. So I'm going to go with that. I'm happy with what that's showing me. So I'm going to press num to clear it. And now, of course, all we have to do is wait till our DTE is 0, and then we're ready to go to the moon. Now, I can't do 2 different transfers simultaneously. I've either got to do the TransX transfer, or I have to do the transfer. So I will choose to use the TransX maneuver, and then we'll just kind of watch over here to see maybe how the timing compares to what we see in TransX. So I'm going to press VW a couple of times to get over to target. And TransX wants me to do the maneuver in 1,935 seconds. So let's warp time ahead to that point. And as we're getting in close, we want to go to rotation. And then line up this green X with the center. And it's basically mostly a prograde maneuver. So we can start by pressing prograde to get us mostly lined up. But now what we want to do is turn off prograde and then finish lining up the X with the center. about like that. Well, get a little more accurate. And now we warp time ahead to get the rest of the way over there. And we don't actually start the burn until this is all the way down to 0. If you watch the moon tutorial, I think it tells you to start the burn when DTE is like 45 seconds. But with TransX, it takes the differences into account, so we actually wait till it's 0. So we're going to do the burn in about 10 seconds. And burning. Now we can watch the target view, and we want to keep that green X mostly centered. If you ever need to make an adjustment to that green X, when you need to have your rotation thrusters on, and in my opinion you only want to use control thrusters like that. I'm holding down control. If you use the regular thrusters, it's going to throw that green X way out. So we're just going to keep an eye on this. It really isn't going to drift much through the beginning of the burn. It's not till you get down toward the end that it starts to really start to move. But we can just kind of compare, what we're seeing here with what you would see in transfer. And if I bring up an external MFD, we can look at the other view of TransX here. So you can kind of see here we've got the same view that you would have here. And just like with transfer, you can warp time ahead to get through the burn more quickly if you want. I just haven't done that because I've been explaining things. And at this point we're getting close enough to the end of the burn that I'm not going to warp time ahead. There I just did a little bit of control thrust to line that X up a little more. And again, that's one of the advantages of TransX over transfer. With transfer, they just have you go to the prograde position and do the burn throughout, whereas here you have a target to aim for throughout the burn, so it's updating in real time. So if you keep that X centered, you're going to have a more accurate burn. And you can see our green ellipse growing here, growing there. And when we get down toward the end of the burn, just like with transfer, you do want to start to back off the main engines a little bit so you don't overshoot. And don't worry about that green X at the moment. We'll take care of that in a second. Okay, there we are at the end of the burn. Now in order to fix this and get the last little bit of delta V, what I do is use translation thrusters.
Translation.
Like that. To get it completely centered. Now I use 6 to get that last little bit of delta V. And there we have it. Now, you can see this looks a little different than transfer. But again, we had to choose one or the other. We can't burn both at the same time. Now, with transfer, once the burn's complete, you press HTO to turn off the hypothetical information. And to do that maneuver, or to do that step in TransX, you press VW until you're at maneuver. Then you go through the variables and you change maneuver mode to off. And we can close that out. We're done with it. And that's it, we're done. If you want to see what the outcome of your burn was, you can't do that in transfer, but in TransX, if you go forward and view the encounter, you can see that according to TransX, again, this is the moon, and this is what our projected orbit looks like, and according to TransX, we're going to be coming around the moon at 500 kilometers. Now again, this will change, because as we pull away from the Earth, there's some gravitational influences that TransX doesn't take into account, and that's going to have a fairly big impact on this number. So we're not going to worry about this for a while. But yeah, that's it really. To complete this flight, you can ignore what you could. There are some things you could do in TransX as you go through the journey out to the moon, but for the sake of learning how to switch from this MFD to this MFD, what you can do for your first few trips is ignore TransX at this point and just do your mid-course corrections the way you would normally do when using transfer. And I'll show you what I mean. So let's go out to the moon.
Rotation.
And when using transfer, you usually wait until you are within the moon's SOI before you do any kind of mid-course corrections. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, we should be getting pretty close. So now I'm going to reference the moon. And I'm just going to wait for orbit HUD to tell me that I'm within the moon's SOI. Warping time ahead. Okay, there we have it. So now I'll come back down to real time. And the first thing I'll do is auto-reference just to make sure that I'm, referencing the moon at HUD to make sure that information's copied to the HUD. Now I'll go prograde. Okay. And if you know how to line up with the base, then all this is the same, because we're just going to bring up map, and I'm going to change the display over to orbit plane, going to target Brighton Beach, and I'm going to bring up orbit MFD. We're going to look at our inclination, which is 6. That's closer to 0, so that means we're going to have a normal east to west, or rather west to east orbit around the moon. So I believe we need orbit minus. That may not be exactly correct, but see our line bending. This is basically what they tell you to do in the tutorial. We're not in the most ideal position for this. Yeah, that's not that great. Looks like that way would have been better. Okay, well, whatever the case, we got it. I think we took the long way around to get it, but we got it. And then, just like with the tutorial, you then have to go either inward or outward to either raise your periapsis or lower it. And in this case, we need to lower it. Didn't realize I still had time warp on. So we're going to go minus 90. Now we'll just burn as much as we need to burn to bring our periapsis down. And since it'll change a little bit as we get closer to the moon, I'm just going to set it to about 80 kilometers. I think that'll be fine. Yeah, you can see it's going down a little bit, so we don't want to lower it too much. So now we just need to warp time ahead to periapsis, assuming we don't have our PEA go down too much. And we're getting there. Go retrograde. And just like the tutorial says, once you get around here, about to that point, you can engage the main engines and actually close in the orbit. And we'll go with something like that. May have started the engines a little bit too soon. And something the tutorial didn't tell you, but I'll tell you, if you see your periapsis going down like that, if you don't want it to, what you can do, I'll show you here in a moment, if it starts going down too much, is you can turn off the retrograde, and you can actually adjust your yaw a little bit inward and outward to prevent your periapsis from going down. And to show you that, I'll decrease the main engines a bit. But you can see if we rotate like this, our PEA is no longer going down, it's actually starting to go up a little bit. So that's how we can control the PEA through the burn to make sure that we don't lose altitude. Since we're at 71 kilometers, it doesn't matter. But if we were only at 10 kilometers, then we might be more concerned about controlling it. And there we go, basically circular orbit. So that is basically, that's obviously how to get to the moon using TransX instead of transfer. And hopefully that helps out people that are wanting to make that transition from transfer over to TransX. Now, I don't know about you, but I really wish I had a video like this when I was trying to learn TransX. So hopefully that helps you out. Alright, I'm going to end this video here. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below. And if you like the video, let me know, and I'll talk to you next time.